Hey guys, I just wanted to give you my general philosophy on evaluating pitching mechanics. One thing I need you to understand, or a few things I need you to understand, is when we throw, we are starting in a static position, and we need to generate as much potential energy as we can. And then using the slope and the big muscles of our body, we need to capture that energy and put it into the baseball in order to throw it as hard and as efficiently as possible. And so, how do we do this? Well, when I look at mechanics, first of all, I understand that everyone does going to do things a little bit differently, right? If you look at Aroldis Chapman and you look at Ben Joyce, both those guys throw absolute fire, right? They both throw 103, 105 miles an hour at different times in their career. But one's right-handed, one's left-handed. One is they're both super strong guys, but their mechanics are definitely different if you watch them throw. However, there's some general mechanical truths that we need to understand that every hard thrower does. But aesthetically, things might look a little bit different when they do it. So when I evaluate mechanics, I like to keep things rather general. So what that means is I like to look at how do you lift your leg and load your hips? How do you drop into your back leg or drop and go down the mound? How do you block with your lead leg? And then how do you rotate out of that and then release and follow through? Now, one thing that we need to understand is how we release, follow through, and even block and land with our lead leg and rotate. A lot of that is at the mercy of what we do early in the delivery. So the way that we set ourselves up through our leg lift, through how we drop into our back leg during our lateral move, a lot of that has a big impact on what happens when we land, when we get into front foot strike, when we rotate, and then release and follow through. And so what are the things that I'm really looking for during our lift? Okay, so during the lift, I like to see a back foot that stays relatively flat. Okay, so a lot of hard throwers won't have a ton of movement in their back foot during their lift. They stay relatively tall during their leg lift, so they might have a little bit of flexion. So you'll see Stroman has a little bit of flexion during his leg lift. Okay, the other thing that you'll notice is they keep their hips underneath them, and they almost create a little bit of a C shape with their spine and with their hips as they get into peak leg lift. So you can really see it with Stroman. He's got this bend in his spine. Okay, Wheeler kind of has the same thing, but you'll see that they tuck their tail underneath them. It's called posterior tilt, and they create this C shape with their spine. And what that does is that sets them up in a good position in order to ride down the mound. Okay, the other thing that you'll notice is as they get into their leg lift, they'll do what I call squeeze the OJ out with their knee. So, Stroman's is pretty out to in, so he'll kick out, but as he gets into his lift, he lifts his leg tall and he gets small, if you will. So imagine if you have an orange under that lead leg and he squeezes it out, and what that does is that just helps us stay stacked and keep our keep our center of mass underneath us as we lift. Okay, so Wheeler really brings his heel underneath him and really squeezes the OJ out with that lead leg. But again, all of this is just designed to help us keep our center of mass underneath us and gets us set up in a good position in order to work our way down the mound. Okay, the next thing is as we start to get into our backside, or as we start to drop into our back leg. Okay, a couple things we need to understand is everyone drops to different depths. So, if some guys that stay a little taller, like Wheeler's definitely taller than Stroman. Okay, Stroman gets pretty low. If you look at someone like Garrett Cole's definitely pretty tall. And so there's not like we have to sit super low, right? So you'll hear some guys say tall and fall. You'll hear some guys say drop and drive. One's not necessarily right. One's not necessarily wrong. But just understand that there's different levels for each one. Okay, but the main thing that I like to see out of guys is I like to see them maintain that C shape in their spine. So we talked about creating this shape in their spine, hips stay underneath them, as they go down the mound. I like to see them maintain that as they go sideways. Basically, what that allows them to do is stay closed with their hips. Okay, so we don't want to see hips open up too early. All right, Wheeler opens up his hips a little bit earlier than Stroman. All right, but for the most part, he's staying sideways with his body as he goes down the mound. Okay, Stroman does the same thing. So as they drop into their back leg, they're staying sideways and they're staying closed. So you'll also notice, how do they stay closed? Well, they've got this bend in their spine. Okay, their hips stay underneath them. You'll also see that they close off their glove side. So both guys are really closed with their glove side, with their front shoulder. Other guys like Stroman or Garrett Cole will be more direct with their front side, so they won't necessarily get that big counter rotation, right? Other things that they'll do is they'll set, because they are able to stay closed. One of the byproducts of that is they sit their butt back behind their heel. Okay, we call this a hinge, right? So their back knee isn't really drifting super far past their back toes, but their butt is sitting back behind their heel as they go down the mound. And again, this all is designed to help them stay closed as they're moving towards home. Okay, if we keep going with Stroman, we can really see it here. So again, tucks his tail, squeezes the OJ out at the top, creates that C shape in his spine, and then butt sits back as he goes down the mound. He stays closed, and he's able to stay sideways for a long time. So you'll notice that as he's dropping, he's staying sideways. He's not rotating his hips open early as he's going down the mound. And then right before front foot strike, that's when his hips fire. Okay, so what are we doing during lift? Essentially what we're doing is we're creating tension over that back leg, right? So we want to rotate with that back leg as far as we can, building tension without losing stability in that back leg. The other thing that you'll notice is as these guys are lifting, it's a little bit tough from these front views, but as they are lifting, they're drifting towards home. Okay, so there's no such thing as a balance point necessarily. It's more of a dynamic balance point as we lift. But you'll notice with a lot of hard throwers is as they lift, they're drifting towards home, and that allows them to get into the ground a little bit better. Okay, so these are all, I know I'm throwing a ton of information, but these are all things that are happening during the initial part of the move that if we can get right, it sets us up for a good place to rotate and block. Okay, so again, tall in the back leg, squeeze the OJ out, create a C shape in your spine, create a little drift during your lift, then drop into that back leg where the butt sits behind the heel, hips stay closed as you're going sideways, glove side stays closed, and then right before front foot strike, those hips open up. So hips closed, and then boom, they open right into front foot strike. Okay, so same thing here, open right into front foot strike. And so notice what happens here. So front foot lands, this is where we get into the blocking phase. So the back leg generates all of this momentum down the mound, gets us moving fast. Okay, the front leg has to stop that forward momentum, send it up your body, up your leg, use the ground to stop your forward momentum, send that energy up your leg, up your trunk, and then ultimately out your arm. Okay, and you'll see that when these guys land, they create what's known as hip to shoulder separation. So their hips are opening up towards home, and their trunk is closed off. So in this case, they're right-handed, and their trunk is facing the third base batter's box, or facing third base essentially. And so this creates this giant stretch in the center of their body, in their obliques, in their core. Okay, you'll also notice that their arm is up and loaded, so there's a little bit of stretch across the pecs. And so what happens is, because we create this big stretch, it creates it's like a rubber band effect. So body is stretched, and then as they go forward, that stretch, or the rubber band is snapped, and all that energy is sent into the baseball and out their arm. Okay, so what does the lead leg have to do? It has to stop your forward momentum, and then it has to continue to, and it has to send that momentum or that energy up your trunk and out your arm. Okay, some things that you'll notice is that front foot or front leg locks out. Okay, now we're not actively locking it out. It locks out due to good hip rotation. So the hips continue to rotate, and as the hips rotate, it locks out that lead leg. So you'll hear some guys say lead leg block. I don't spend a ton of time talking about the lead leg block because it's usually a result of good hip rotation. And a lot of guys will get this part wrong, and they'll actively try to straighten out their lead leg in reality it's just that hips continue to rotate and it pulls that lead leg straight. Okay, and you don't necessarily have to even lead leg block. Guys like Ben Joyce, his lead leg doesn't actually straighten all the way out, right? So the main thing is that it stops your forward momentum. Okay, in terms of arm action, okay, the main thing with the arm is that we want it to be effortless and we want it to release in plane of rotation. So for both of these guys, they're not muscling up with their arm at all. The arm almost like floats and just as a result and just moves as a result of the middle of their body. And so you'll notice that for the most part, when they release, if I were to draw a line up their spine and then draw a line across their shoulders, okay, that would be perpendicular. So arm slot is determined by your trunk. And so when they go to throw, again, things are perpendicular here. So if I drew a line up their spine and then drew a line across their shoulders, their arm would match that line. It's called releasing in plane of rotation. Okay, so arm slot is determined by your spine, not necessarily by like how high we lift our arm. So if I want to throw from a higher slot, I need to tilt my spine more. If I want to throw from a lower slot, I need to keep my spine more up and down. So that's just something to keep in mind with arm action. Again, a lot of times though, arm action is a result of how we move the middle of our body, and how we're moving through the middle of our body is all set up at the beginning of delivery. So I don't spend a ton of time on arm action either. There are some cases where I do, but a lot of times it's just understanding how to relax our arm and let it unwind by using our spine in the middle of our body to throw. Okay. And then last thing we have is release and follow through. So you'll notice that both of these guys, because they're set up so well, their direction towards home is excellent. Okay, their lead leg is going straight towards home. Now, not everyone, again, has to throw going directly towards home. But for the most part, a lot of guys are pretty well lined up towards home. And then you'll notice that as they finish, okay, their trunk is tilted towards home, and they don't have like this big like slap where they're going across their body. Okay, their arm just unwinds. They finish with good pronation, and then they go into their release. The back leg comes up and over. Okay, and again, almost all of that, these aren't things that I spend a ton of time on, because almost always this is just a result of how they did everything else earlier in the delivery. Okay, the only thing that I sometimes will spend time on is a lot of times based on how they release, will tell you, maybe what their flaws are earlier. But obviously these guys don't really have a ton of flaws. They throw pretty efficiently, and so things look pretty clean here. But hopefully that just kind of gives you a general idea of some things that I like to look for when I'm evaluating pitching mechanics. Like I said, there's no one set way to throw, but there are some general overall movement principles that have a big impact on our ability to throw efficiently, and throw not only efficiently, but throw harder and throw with command. So if you have any questions on this, be sure to let me know, but I hope that you found this helpful.